Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Government Account Manager at WRAP, so I'm responsible for WRAP's relationship with DEFRA, and I also look after our team of researchers and economists. So WRAP is a charity. We've been in existence for about 18 years, and our vision is a world in which resources are used sustainably. So it's perfectly in line with the aspirations of a circular economy. The way that WRAP works is by trying to challenge the way that we think about products at every stage in their life cycle. So try and reinvent products in the first place to make them more circular. Rethink the way that we consume and use products, so that's the link to the business models. And redefine what's possible at the end of life, so finding new ways to reuse products, finding new ways to recycle those as well. And the key there is developing the market so it keeps going round in the circle. We've got 4 areas of focus. So the first area of focus is on food. So food is one of the big success stories of WRAP that I'll come back to again. But essentially when we're looking at the challenges in food production, use and disposal of unwanted food, the biggest challenge in the UK is in food discarded by consumers. So WRAP's done a lot of work there, and we're working with the whole value chain to actually try and address some shared issues. We're also working in the resource management sector, so we work with local authorities, helping to advise them on optimising collection systems, and then also working with the waste management companies to think about the processes that they're implementing. On textiles, we have a voluntary agreement called the Sustainable Clothing Action Plan in the UK, and we also lead the European Clothing Action Plan. So again, it's about bringing people together to tackle shared issues. And finally, this year we launched a voluntary agreement on plastics. I'll say a little bit more about that later as well. But in each case, we're trying to apply the principles of the circular economy. One of the reasons that we think the circular economy is a good idea is because we've done a lot of research into this area that underpins all our action. So one of the things that we looked at was employment in the circular economy. I won't say too much now, but very happy to talk, Heather, at any time about what we found there. But essentially the key thing about our research is that we identified how and why a more circular economy can lead to a net increase in employment, which is to do with the way the jobs are created and the way the circular economy is structured, which isn't necessarily the same as the linear economy. Happy to go into that into more detail if people want to. But having identified those principles and established them, we've then tried to apply them in a number of projects. So we had a project which is now finished called Rebus, which was with a range of partners including Rijkswaterstaat in the Netherlands, and that was looking at trialling more resource efficient business models across a range of different areas. So in the UK we focused on working with businesses who wanted to create a circular offering. And in the Netherlands, we were working on the procurement side with Rijkswaterstaat, looking at encouraging people to buy in a circular way. So that was a very successful project, and we're able to look at how we can make changes in terms of recycling, which is what most people think of when they think of the circular economy, remanufacturing, so taking the goods back and selling them as they are, repair and reuse, where you retain the ownership, and the leasing and service models as well. And so they all fit within WRAP's way of thinking. What we were able to do with the data that we got from the Rebus project and different national and international data sets is actually identify the potential of the circular economy across a range of different metrics. So we created 3 scenarios looking at different levels of take-up of the circular economy. The current development path is the most similar to the EU Circular Economy Package. So we looked at a scenario where there were no new initiatives, we just carry on as we are. A scenario which is broadly similar to the Circular Economy Package, and then a transformational scenario where the circular economy gets taken up in a range of different ways across Europe. What we're able to show is that there would be some GVA losses because there'd be a reduction in manufacturing activity, but that would be more than compensated for by the increase in gross value added in each country due to the new circular activities. Gross value added, we think, is a more appropriate indicator than GDP, because it's telling you what's going on in that country, what you're doing to those products, and we can measure that at a sector level. We can also see where that is coming from. So in the scenarios that we looked at, the greatest opportunity is remanufacturing. So people taking products back, refurbishing them, and selling them again. So that could be the same brand taking back their own products, or it could be someone else refurbishing it. But the next biggest opportunity was in rental and lease, and then to a less degree repair and recycling, so the things that we're already doing. So you can see, if we're looking at growing the circular economy, it's not going to be more of the same. So that's one of the challenges. It's not just about more recycling, it's about completely rethinking a number of different areas. If we're looking at the impact on employment, as I said, we think this would lead to net increases in employment. So there will be some job losses associated with manufacturing, but there will be jobs created, and potentially those are in the same business. If we're thinking of remanufacturing, that can take place in exactly the same premises, in the same companies as manufacturing. So when we're talking about job loss and jobs created, potentially we're not talking about people losing jobs and others gaining jobs. Perhaps we're talking about the same people just being described in a slightly different way, potentially doing something very similar. And also there's massive greenhouse gas emission reduction opportunities from this. So when we looked at the models and what would happen in terms of the reductions in emissions associated with the circular economy, we think it could deliver up to 8% of the UK's fifth carbon budget. So we've got massive increases in gross value added, massive increases in employment, big reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. So why isn't this happening anyway? So we think some of this is happening anyway. So you can see the examples of circular economy models out there, but there are a number of barriers, and a key barrier is that you need to take multiple actions simultaneously. So the enablers need to be put in place across the product life cycle. So if you think back 15 years ago, when WRAP was doing some work on plastics recycling, there was a lack of plastics recycling in the UK because there was a lack of markets, there was a lack of collection infrastructure, there was a lack of public understanding of what needed to be done. All of those things had to be addressed simultaneously, because if we just addressed one of those, the system wouldn't have worked. There's no point putting in infrastructure if there's no market. There's no point communicating to people if there's nowhere for them to put the products. So everything has to happen at once, and that's one of the key challenges we think for the circular economy. We also think fundamentally though, the issues are the same as any new business. So if I want to set up any new business, I've got to sort out my finance and I need to identify who my customers are. It's exactly the same issue for the circular economy, with the added challenge that if I'm going for a circular business model, my return on investment will probably be slower than in a conventional model. I need more investment up front and it's going to take me longer to recoup that. Longer term I'll be more profitable, but pitching that sort of business to a bank is less attractive potentially, so that's a risk as well. If we're talking to people about leasing something instead of owning something, potentially they may perceive that as a detrimental to their quality of life. They feel like they're losing something. So it's very important that when we're proposing circular economy business models, we propose them in a way that shows people what the advantage is, how this new model is taking a pain away. We can't just assume that people are going to come on to the new business model. And it's the same issue for business as well. You have to sell this internally. If we're getting less throughput, people sometimes see that as actually less business, and it's not true, it's just different business. And so finally as well, as I think other people have mentioned already, there are some disconnects between who bears the costs of a circular economy business model and who gets the benefits as well. So these are all the sorts of challenges that we're looking to address as WRAP. And when we're thinking about the different types of circular business model, these are easier to do. It's quite easy to make a product that lasts longer. It's quite difficult to implement a service system. But that's where the greatest opportunities are, and that's where we're looking to shift. This is almost, I hesitate to say business as usual, but these are relatively simple things to do. Over here requires a lot more thought, but there's potentially greater rewards. So there are solutions to all of these things. So this is just an example of a report from Ingbank. So they've identified a range of different funding mechanisms for circular economy business models, and they don't think it's necessarily through loans. So there's a range of different ways that businesses can access the thinking. It just requires a bit of innovation. And when we're looking at our different sectors, the food, resources, clothing, plastics, there are different solutions there as well. So whilst our approaches might broadly be similar, one of the key things for us for the circular economy is it needs a different approach depending on the product group that you're talking about. So when we're communicating with the public, we've got 3 main campaigns that we lead on. So Love Food, Hate Waste. How many people in the room have come across that? Yeah, great. Recycle Now. Yeah, Love Your Clothes. Yeah, so slightly diminishing returns. So lots of people have heard about Love Food, Hate Waste. It was very high profile and it really captured a moment in the UK. Recycle Now, it's Recycle Week this week, so hopefully you'll see a lot more about recycling. And Love Your Clothes has been more niche, so we've been using more segmentation where we've been getting the messages out there. But a lot of our work, as I mentioned, is collaboration. So to develop the circular economy, we think you need a lot of collaboration. So with the food sector, we've got an agreement which includes most UK retailers, a lot of food manufacturers, to reduce food and drink waste by 20% and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions associated with the whole value chain by 20% as well. So that requires a number of different working groups. The focus is on household food waste, but there's actions that we can take at every stage. And all of those actions have to demonstrate their own business case. People aren't just doing this out of the goodness of their hearts, they're doing it because they can see an opportunity in it. And the way that that works is through optimising the whole supply chain so that they waste less, influencing consumers to reduce waste, but then also finding innovative ways of using the waste that is left. There is a lot of innovation out there. There are lots of things that we can do with food even if it's not eaten, whether that's redistribution to other people who could eat it, or whether it's some novel chemical recovery. There's plenty of opportunity out there, and so there's lots of things to research and understand. But embedding the new criteria into design, buying and sourcing is really key as well. So getting things right in the first place and then working with the right influencers. On resource management, I mentioned before we think there's huge opportunities for a more circular economy. Our modelling suggests that there's potential to generate another £430 million from selling recovered materials collected in the UK by 2025. So, it's reasonable amounts of money, and it'll have big benefits as well in terms of reduced greenhouse gas emissions. So this is what we're working with local authorities on. A key area is consistency. We've got a strategy out about consistency and how we can work with local authorities to help make collections simpler for people to use, but then also making sure that we can access the markets for those materials as well. So that's a big focus of our work. Clothing, I wanted to talk a little bit about. So I mentioned segmentation earlier. So when we're thinking about messages and how we work with different groups of society, it's not necessarily about demographics, it's about behaviours and attitudes of different groups. And so when we're thinking of clothing, we've identified 6 different segments for the UK. And the one that everyone is interested in is segment 6, which is love shopping. So what we've identified is that 6% of the UK population are responsible for 18% of the clothes shopping. So one of the things about the circular economy is that very often, intuitively or instinctively, we start thinking about solutions that everyone in the population can take up. But we don't need that. If we want more circular clothing, we just need to target this 6%, and we can have a massive impact. So with the insights we've developed for the different sectors, what we've identified is we've looked at their social values and how important clothing is to them. So as you'd expect, segment 6, clothing is very important to them. It's important to their identity, but also these are people with strong social values. So they want to see something good done with those clothes. They're all generally urban, and they generally don't have a lot of storage space. So although they want to do the right thing, these people are faced with a challenge. They want to look up to date all the time, but they don't have a lot of space and they don't necessarily know how to hand on their clothing to get more use out of it. So that's where messages like Love Your Clothes can come in. That's also where work with the businesses can come in. So there's lots of business models out there like Rent the Runway, where you can lease clothing instead of buying it. So in the general population, about half the population are interested in renting clothes in principle. In segment 6, 80% of them would like to rent their clothes. So again, it's about developing the right market insights. There's the customer base for the new business model. So our role then is to help reveal that sector to the retail sector and to try and get them to take this opportunity, not to just sell these people more clothes, but to actually sell them clothes in a different way that is more sustainable. We also done some work in the past on electronics, and this is just to highlight again that the same issues don't necessarily cross product groups, or even when we think of electricals, they're not the same thing as well. So if we're looking at things like DIY and gardening, lots of people are interested in trading in, buying second hand, but when we're thinking about workhorse items, it's a different picture, so more people there are interested in repair potentially. So we've got to understand our products and we've got to understand our customers if we're going to develop effective circular economy models. The latest addition to our family of voluntary agreements is on plastics. So this year we launched the UK Plastics Pact. So there's about 80 businesses in that, responsible for over 1 million tonnes of plastic packaging placed on the market in the UK, so about half of the plastic packaging. So they've come together to work with us, and these are the targets they've agreed to ensure that the materials are not just recyclable but also include recycled content, looking at composting and looking at design to make sure that everything can be reused, recycled or composted. They've also agreed to take action to eliminate problematic or unnecessary single-use plastic items. And we're in the stage now where we're getting them together in working groups to be more specific on the definitions for these different issues, which is where the challenge really starts. So in summary, we think that the circular economy is a tremendous opportunity, but it means different things to different people and different product groups. So whilst we've got some general principles, we can't assume that because we've done something in one area and it worked, that we can then transfer that without understanding that area as well. So that's where we think there's a strong role for the research community. Circular economy business models require active management. You have to push them, you have to remind people to consider procuring products in this way. We need to make sure that there are parallel collaborative actions underway, because if we just try and change one bit of the system, it won't work. We need enablers in place. And we think the key issue is making sure that we've identified the customer and brought them on the journey with us. So if we're thinking of public sector procurement, the public sector needs to write specifications and tenders in such a way to enable people to bid on a circular economy basis. We can't just assume that we can offer them something and they will take it. There is a market appetite out there for increased resource efficiency, so lots of people are interested in material efficiency. We think this is a really good opportunity right now, and there's a huge opportunity to add more value per unit of product. The challenge is actually getting that message to the business audiences in such a way that they can see the benefit of this, and then getting to the customers in such a way that they can see the benefit too. Thank you very much.
From what you have told us, I understand that you have somehow succeeded to build partnership with all these organizations and businesses. How do you approach them in terms of selling them your ideas?
Yeah, so it's come about in different ways. So on food, we started about 10 years ago, and it was from the basis of packaging. So when we first started working with food and drink retailers and manufacturers, it was to halt the growth in packaging, then to reduce the carbon footprint of packaging and food, and now it's to reduce the amount and impact of food waste. So they've been on a journey with us. So we started in one place, but having seen success there, we've been able to develop the conversation. In terms of plastics, it was very topical, so we started working with the plastics organisations perhaps 2 years ago. There's really been momentum there, so the external pressures have helped there. On clothing, DEFRA had developed the beginning of a voluntary agreement, so they got some goodwill from a sector, and then WRAP got involved and shaped it in a slightly different way, so it's more about shared targets. So that's the key thing that WRAP does. It's not necessarily about people coming forward and saying what they're doing, we're trying to get them to commit to something new and shared. So that's what takes the extra amount of effort, because then we need all the working groups and the transparency to ensure that this is a fair process.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. And I'm really curious to know, because you talked about job displacement and job creation in the circular economy.
Yeah.
And then obviously the loss of manufacturing connected with some parts of the industry. So what your estimates are, the types of jobs and the kind of skill levels required for them, as you kind of foresee in this kind of transition?
Yes. So what we're seeing at the moment is a hollowing out in the economy. So if we look back to since 2010, since the recession, the jobs that have been lost are medium skilled. The jobs that have been created have been low skilled or at the upper end. So that's the hollowing out. The type of skill you need in the circular economy is exactly that mid-skilled role that's being lost. So that's why there's an opportunity to create net jobs. But also it's the location that those jobs are created in. So circular economy jobs tend to be relatively local, whereas the linear economy jobs are fixed around different nodes. So if we're creating new circular economy activity, the chances are you can do it where you are. You don't necessarily have to move. So that's another reason why we think there's going to be net jobs.
And you see evidence of locality then?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, when we're looking at things like the reuse and remanufacturing, those are things that can happen at a more local level.
But there's not then a risk of those things being potentially outsourced because of prices and things?
Not more than any other part of the economy. But yeah, when we looked at this, we've looked at the employment for the UK and we've also looked at the EU. So what we found is that this is generally applicable. There are different levels of current engagement in the circular economy in different EU countries, but there's no correlation between north and south or east and west. And there are slightly different focuses in different countries. So yeah, it could move across borders.
When you talk about the circular business models, you said that the product as a service is one of the most with the highest impact on creation of value. But you also said that one of the barriers is the consumer behavior, like the attachment to the products. How do you have recommendations on how to deal with that?
Yes, that's where we think the behavioural segmentation is really useful. So with the example of clothing, understanding that there is a segment out there that buy a lot of clothes, but would rather not actually. If a circular business model was offered to them, they would take it. So that's the kind of insight that we think is useful. We tried that same segmentation for electrical products and it didn't really work. So we weren't able to break the population up in the same way and find a correlation between particular groups and behaviours and attitudes and the way that they buy electrical products. So that's why we think there's probably a different solution.
Different product.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a question about sort of measuring the impacts of the indicators, and because, like you say, the circular economy means a lot of things to different industries and we work with many different industries. And for example, the amount of water consumed per product is different in textiles and food. So when you're working with these different organisations, do you provide them with metrics and you develop them together, or is it consistent? Like how do you tackle that?
Yeah, so we developed the targets with them. So on SCAP, the clothing voluntary agreement, we've got targets around carbon, waste and water. And then we develop the methodology that we're going to use, agree that with them, and then we also develop tools to help them track changes, but also to help them model potential changes. So we give them the tools they need to understand what their impact is now and what they can do about it.
Yeah, like industry specific ones, or?
Yes, industry specific, yeah. So we've got a Courtauld tool, we've got a SCAP tool, we've got some packaging tools as well. But they work best when they're tied in with some overarching activity. There's the odd occasional tool as well. We did one on the benefits of reuse, which is something I worked on in 2011. We don't promote that at all, but we still managed to get about 100 people a year download the tool. So yeah, they come across it, so we know that people out there are interested in these issues.
One last question.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation, very interesting. I would like to go back to one of the, I think, earlier slides where you showed these cost and benefits. You showed the gross value and something instead of GDP.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate a little bit on what you're measuring there?
Yeah. Yeah, so GVA, gross value added, so in national statistics you can look at how much value is being added by different sectors of the economy, whereas GDP is the sum of GVA for the different sectors. So we were interested in what's going on specifically in manufacturing and then the other areas where we could identify an existing sector. One of the challenges in measuring the circular economy is there's no remanufacturing sector. So if we go and look at the standard industrial classifications, we can find repair, we can find rental, we can find recycling. Remanufacturing is just part of general manufacturing, and so we need to do a bit of extra modelling there to work out what the potential is of remanufacturing compared to manufacturing. But using GVA allows us to look at a more detailed level at what's happening within the economy.